Hi, friends. I wanted to do something special for you, my incredible subscribers, as a thank you. So, for the first time ever, you can be part of an exclusive live murder, mystery, and makeup episode. Oh, yes. I'm doing it live, baby. So you'll get to see the whole thing created from the foundation up. You see what I did there? Foundation. You can engage with me along the way, and there's also going to be some special surprises. Plus, you'll be able to interact with each other and with me live, like never before. And on top of all that, you can get your hands on some limited edition merch. There's also going to be a VIP after party experience I'm calling Murder Mystery Makeup Post-Mortem, where you can like hang out with me afterwards. We can have some chit chat, some talks, some questions, secrets will be told. It'll be a good time. This is a one night only event you don't want to miss, and it cannot be seen anywhere else but Moment by Patreon. I'm serious, like it won't be posted on YouTube or anything, This live event is happening tomorrow, October 15th, 2024 at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, and 6 p.m. Pacific. Tickets are on sale right now at moment.co/MMM. It's gonna be so much fun, and honestly, I'm a little nervous because it's live, but it's gonna be fun. But I really hope to see you there. Tickets are on sale right now at moment.co/MMM. Again, that's moment.co/MMM. And now let's get into today's episode of Murder, Mystery, and Makeup. Hi friends, how are you today? My name is Bailey Sarian, and today is Monday, which means it's Murder, Mystery, and Makeup Monday. Hi! Doing a little Halloween edition. I'm wearing a tube top. I'm not naked, just a little FYI. If you're new here, hi, my name is Bailey Sarian, and on Mondays I sit down and I talk about true crime story. That's been heavy on my noggin, and I do my makeup at the same time. So if you're interested in true crime and you like makeup, I would say subscribe because I'm here for you on Mondays. So do it, subscribe, like, do all that stuff or whatever. Leave a comment, I read them. So today's story, let me tell you, it's rough, it's real bad. Because we're talking about this guy, his name's Ottis Toole. He was a serial arsonist, rapist, murderer, and self-proclaimed cannibal. I'm pissing off YouTube daddy already, I know. Between the early 60s and the early 80s, Ottis, he had killed allegedly over 100 people across at least 26 states in the US. Some of his victims were hitchhikers, teenagers, and sex workers. Others were massage parlor employees, bank tellers, or convenience store workers. This guy, he's wild. He dismembered some of his victims and then drove around in his car with the body parts. Yeah. And then at times, he allegedly drank their blood. So here we go with that, So Ottis, he actually committed many of his gruesome crimes with another notorious serial killer. This is a crossover episode. His name was Henry Lucas. Did we do an episode on him? I can't remember right now. But Henry Lucas is also this crazy serial killer. And him and Ottis linked up, and they were allegedly lovers. On top of all that, there's a cult thrown into the mix. This one's got everything, right? I know. There's a lot going on, baby. And this is just the intro. Oh, I kind of lightly said in the intro, this is the Halloween edition one. I'm going to try and do a Halloween look. But I'm going to pull a Mean Girls situation where I'm just going to put on some ears. So don't get too excited. We'll see. We'll see where this goes. I don't really know. Anyways, let's start with Ottis, huh? So Ottis Elwood Toole. He was born March 5th, 1947, and he was raised in Jacksonville, Florida. It was said that his father, not a great guy, he was an alcoholic, and he ended up leaving the family when Ottis was just a kid. But not before causing his son, Ottis, significant damage. Now, according to Ottis himself, when he was just 5 years old, his father forced him to have sexual relations with his father's friend. If that wasn't enough, Ottis's mother, I guess, also abused him. she would dress him up in girls' clothing and then call him Susan. Yep. So mommy wasn't safe, daddy wasn't safe, and then his older sister, she too wasn't safe because it was said, this is all according to Ottis, he said that his older sister started having sex with him before he could even like really understand what was going on. And then I'm laughing because it's just, it's just because it gets worse because everyone's messed up, right? And then Ottis's grandma, I guess she had added to all the abuse. So Ottis's grandma, it was said that she was a Satanist and she called Ottis the devil's child. Cute. I don't know, I don't know, yep. All right. So instead of teaching him how to be a kid, I don't know, just be normal, how to play, read, cook, show him love, she instead showed young Ottis satanic practices and rituals and introduced him to one of her favorite hobbies, grave robbing. Great. So I think between you and I think it's safe to say that Ottis had a rough upbringing, right? And it's probably would be surprising if Ottis grew up to be quote unquote normal after all these horrible experiences. So it was said that Ottis had behavioral and mental issues that were pretty obvious from an early age. He also had epilepsy, which caused him to have some serious seizures. So when Ottis was in school, he was diagnosed with intellectual disability because he had an IQ of 75. And, I guess the average IQ score is anywhere from 90 to 109. So he was just a little off, During his childhood, Ottis ran away from his home pretty often. And I guess he would just run away, go find an abandoned house somewhere and just sleep there. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, probably just a wild guess here, but I'm sure it was to get away from his psycho family. It's so sad. But when he was alone, this is when he liked to play with fire, and he would burn things. And soon he just became an arsonist. He would say from a young age, setting fires sexually aroused him. So Ottis ended up dropping out of school in the 9th grade. And this is when he began visiting local gay bars. And around the same time, as a teenager, he became a male sex worker. And he also, I guess, developed an obsession with pornography. This is a side note. I mean, I'm sure we all maybe feel this way. Maybe we don't. But I feel so bad for him. He really just had a crappy upbringing and he was not set up to be a great guy. It's just really sad. Two things can be right at the same time. He can be a really terrible person and we hate him, and we can also feel bad for him. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, according to Ottis, he committed his first murder when he was just 14 years old. So at this age, he was picked up by a traveling salesman. And I guess this traveling salesman got a little forceful with Ottis. We don't really know exactly what happened, but what we do know is that some kind of altercation happened. And Ottis was able to take over the guy's car and somehow get the guy out of the car. He takes over the car, runs the guy over with it. Guess he killed him. Ottis would talk about this later in life, but at the time he was never caught for this or charged. So Ottis kind of just disappeared off the radar between 1966 and 1973. Some people believe that he was drifting around in the Southwest, United States at the time, but that's just what people believe. No one really knows. Then in 1974, he was considered a suspect in a murder case. But before he could be questioned by police, he actually ends up taking off to Boulder, Colorado. In September of 1974, Ottis allegedly raided a massage parlor in Colorado Springs. So he goes into this massage parlor, allegedly. And he goes in there and he stabs and he slashed the throat of an employee. Her name was Yon Lee. He moved on to Lee's coworker and like raped her. Then he stabbed and shot her to death. I mean, it was aggressive. It was a lot. It was aggressive and angry and hate fueled. Like, it was bad. Because then on top of that, he ends up setting them both on fire. Yeah, what the fuck? But listen, somehow Yon Lee, she ended up surviving. Oh yeah. And, you know, she was able to call the police, and she gave a description of who her attacker was. She tells the police that it was this guy, like 6'2", 195 pounds, clean shaven, white man in a white pickup truck. And that's really all she knew. But what we know now is that it matched Ottis's description. Unfortunately, at the time, like, Ottis was never found. The next month, in October 1974, 31-year-old Ellen, she was abducted in Pueblo, Colorado, and she was found like shot 3 times in the head. Her body ended up getting dumped near the Oklahoma border. At the time, it was unsolved. Like, there was like they didn't know. They didn't have any leads on this. But then later on, like, homicide detectives would link Ottis to this crime. But at the time, it was just kind of like, well, I don't know. Now, before police could get to him, he had left Boulder and he returned to Jacksonville, Florida in 1975. So while he's back in Florida, he started again working as, you know, a male sex worker. So this part is a little vague in his history because, like, he ends up meeting a woman and he ends up getting married to her in like January of 1976. She is 25 years older than him, and I'm not sure how they met. There's just not much known, but it was said like much later in life, Ottis, he gave like interviews, whatever. So much later, he said that he married this woman because he needed to, or he wanted to, hide his true sexuality. So he gets married to some woman. So in 1976, after he gets married, this is when Ottis meets Henry Lee Lucas in a Jacksonville soup kitchen. Now, just a few years later, like after this meeting, Henry would become one of like the most notorious American serial killers in history. And we'll probably never find out how many people Henry actually killed, but him and Ottis were working together, really. So Henry had reached Jacksonville with like no money and nowhere to stay. So he had learned that there was like a religious mission that offered free food and housing, and that's where he met Ottis. The two of them somehow just connected. They started talking, chatting it up, and they really seemed to hit it off because, like, after meeting for the first time, Ottis invited Henry to come back to his place. Now, Henry and Ottis, they would become lovers. I think many say because of, like, based on, like, mutual attraction, and also they had similar stories. They had a lust for killing. They also had like super messed up backgrounds and family history. So they just like really bonded and connected on all that. I mean, both Henry and Ottis had been raised by abusive mothers who had forced their sons to dress as girls. Both had suffered sexual trauma before the age of 10. And by the time they met, both of them were already murderers. So they're like, hey, you like that shit? I like that shit too. And then they just like hit it off, and they're perfect for each other. So for Henry and Ottis, killing was like just a way for them to bond. You know, they talked about it openly. They would compare notes, and they would give each other tips. Like, hey, I chopped off the head first, and then I went for like the feet and stuff. What about you? And like, I went for the feet and stuff, not the head. Like, you know, just notes. So at this time, Ottis was living in a fairly small house, but he was sharing the house with like a bunch of people. It was Ottis's mom, his stepdad, Ottis's wife, Ottis's niece and nephew, who were like 11 or 12 years old, and then Ottis. So 6 people. And I guess the family was like quite used to Otis bringing strange men home from the mission to have sexual relations with. It wasn't unusual, it was normal. But what made it weird and inappropriate was like he would bring men back to his home to have sex with him, but also to have sex with his wife and his underage niece. Yeah. You know, Otis is one of those people who, like, what do you call them? When they like to watch. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But when Otis brought Henry back to his place, it was a little different. He wanted Henry, like, all to himself. He didn't want to share. So he told his wife to go like live with the neighbors, go stay with the neighbors, you know, so he and Henry could have the main bedroom. I guess Otis felt like his wife was in the way, and honestly he was getting a little jealous because she was trying to come in between him and Henry, you know, and Otis, he wanted Henry all to himself. Well, according to police records, shortly after Henry and Otis met, they spent their free time drinking and like cruising the highways looking for quote unquote fun. Now, apparently their idea of fun, different than a lot of ours, they like to like rob small convenience stores and banks. They stole money, food, beer, and I guess they just really enjoyed like terrorizing the staff of wherever they were robbing. Now, the two of them, they became bolder and more violent over time. Things progressed. Eventually, their crimes became more brutal to the point where, like, if the person that they were robbing or harassing, if that person, like, resisted at all, they would just, like, they didn't think twice. They would just gun them down and then just leave them in, like, a pool of blood. So apparently, Otis and Henry robbed like a small convenience store in western Georgia. I guess Henry had walked to the front counter. He pulled out a .22 caliber handgun and he held it to the temple of the female clerk. He then binds her with like a rope, then drags her to the back of the store while Otis went through the register. So I guess like the woman, naturally, you know, she's screaming and she's struggling and she's trying to get loose. And Henry tells her like if she doesn't keep quiet, he's going to have to shoot her. So I guess at this moment she just obeyed. So Henry and Otis were like dividing the money up. And that's when Henry noticed that the woman was trying to loosen the ropes again. So Henry, casually like walked to the back of the store and he just, again, doesn't hesitate and he shot her right through the temple. Afterwards, while Henry loaded stolen cases of beer into their car, Otis took this opportunity to have sexuals with the woman's body. And I guess they did this a lot. Yeah. Otis and Henry seemed to be like competitive with one another. Like they were trying to prove who was more lethal, who was more bad. Just not great, these guys. Otis later bragged to police of one such incident. While cruising on the I-35 highway through Texas, they, Henry and Otis, came across like a teenage couple walking alongside the road. I guess the couple's car had run out of gas and they were on their way to a gas station. So Otis and Henry, they see this couple and they pull over and Otis like steps out of the vehicle and without even hesitation just like shoots the boy 9 times in the head and his chest and then rolled his body into a tunnel under the road while Henry dragged the girl into the back seat of the car. So Otis drove the car. They take off and, you know, Henry's in the back seat like repeatedly raping the girl. Otis said that watching Henry have sex with like someone else made him angry. These two are just so fucked up. He's getting angry. He's driving the car, Otis. So I guess in a jealous rage, Otis stops the car. He dragged the girl out onto the road and then shot her 6 times and then just left while they drove back towards Jacksonville. Everyone they came in contact with in their eyes, was like a potential victim. Drifters, women with car troubles, hitchhikers, they would all fall victim to this deadly duo. Usually when they committed a murder, it was like done in a very remote area where, there were no witnesses. And if their car broke down or ran out of gas, Ottis and Henry, they would just like steal another one, usually after murdering the driver. And then they would just jump in and be like, it's ours now. The two of them, if they stole a car, they would drive the vehicle to another state, dump it, and then hitchhike to like the next location. Henry said that he enjoyed killing women whose cars had broken down on lonely roads, telling police that he considered them, quote, free lunch. What do you even say to that? Huh? There was one victim that was found like dumped in a field. She was found like completely nude. She had been stabbed 35 times in the chest, the neck, arms, and the back. And they were like deep cuts that were made along the inside of her arms and from the middle of her chest to all the way down to the pubic bone. This is some like dark shit, On top of that, both nipples had been cut off and removed. I would say like this guy's like truly a psycho, but I feel like psycho isn't even the right word for how dark these guys are. Maybe they really are children of Satan or whatever grandma called them. So according to police who pieced together their trail from like pay slips and discarded vehicles, they believe that Ottis and Henry were responsible for up to 4 to 5 murders in each state before moving across state lines. The police believed that on like more than 2 occasions, the pair committed several murders in a single day. Now, cult, where does that come in? Let me tell you. Because according to both Ottis and Henry, while they were on their murder sprees, they were approached by a stranger who offered them a job. Now, the job was to like deliver stolen cars to various destinations. And I guess Henry wasn't really too interested in this. And he's like, no, I'm good. Like, he felt like it would just increase their chances of getting caught by the police. Like, they didn't need it. They were doing just fine without it. They said after that the stranger then made another offer. The stranger asked if they would be interested in contract killing for his quote unquote organization. The stranger told them that they would be paid $10,000 for each execution. Well, after hearing this, now Henry and Ottis, they were interested. $10,000, I mean, that's a lot of money, And they figured that since they'd been killing for fun, they might as well just like get paid for it. The stranger said they would be hired on one condition. Ottis and Henry had to join the organization's religion. So Henry asked like, okay, what's this religion, And the stranger told him that it was like a group and they called themselves the Hand of Death. And this group, they worshipped the devil. Now later on, Ottis would kind of disagree with some of these meeting details, but apart from like their differences in their stories, they both swore that they did in fact join the Hand of Death. And also, side note, if you look up the Hand of Death and you go on like a deep dive trying to find information about it, you don't find anything about it only when it's linked to this story. So, I don't know, fishy. But look, so they end up joining, I guess. Several weeks later, they traveled to Florida to meet the leaders of this cult. They end up meeting in an abandoned warehouse on Miami's waterfront. And the same stranger, whoever that stranger was, this same stranger met them and introduced himself as Don. When Don began to talk about the crimes that the two had committed in the past, Henry became a little suspicious about the situation and asked Don how he knew so much about Henry and Ottis. He's like, how'd you know how many crimes we've done? How do you know about me? And I guess at this point, Don laughed and said that Ottis had actually been working for him for years. So what, was it a setup? Henry told police years later that at the time, he felt betrayed by Ottis and he couldn't believe that he had been manipulated by him into joining the cult. So that night, in an abandoned spot in the Florida Everglades, Henry was inducted into the Hand of Death. Later, he and Ottis were taken deeper into like the Everglades on an airboat. I had to look this up because I was like, what's an airboat? What's a boat with those giant fans on the back of it? I'm laughing because I'm sure everyone knows what an airboat is. I didn't. That's okay. Anyways, they went on a giant airboat and they get taken deeper into the Everglades. And they were taken to an island where Henry would undergo, quote unquote, training. So Dawn had told them that from now on, Henry had to do everything he was told, no matter what. Like, he had to obey. And once Henry proved himself, that's when he would officially be one of the members in the cult. So both men were then taken into a tent, and Henry was told to wait for his assignment. So he's waiting there, like an hour goes by. Finally, Dawn comes back and tells him that his target was in the next tent and that Henry needed to like go into that tent and cut that person's throat. But he had to make sure that like it was a clean cut because the cult people, they would need the body later. So, armed with a knife, Henry and Ottis went to the next tent. Ottis went in first, and he like struck up a conversation with the male that was inside of the tent. Ottis then lured the man to like a nearby beach with the promise of a drink. I guess Ottis had like a bottle of whiskey or something with him, and he's like, hey, like, let's go have a drink and look at the water. He lures him out. Meanwhile, Henry is like waiting in the shadows. And when Ottis hands the man the bottle, you know, he takes a swig and he like tips his head back. That's when Henry comes running up, grabs the man's hair, and then in one quick swipe, he like, yeah. It was said that Henry was congratulated on a quick, clean kill. Again, we don't even know like if this story is true or not, where it's coming from or anything, because you can't find any evidence about any of this. Even investigators didn't find anything about this. So could be true, could be made up. But the fact that they had like similar details to the story, it sounds like it wasn't made up, but I don't know. No one knows. But later that night, Henry attended his first black mass, during which like the man that he had just killed was then cooked and eaten by everyone in the cult. So there's that. So in the weeks after that, Henry said that he was taught the finer points of kidnapping, arson, murder, and child abduction. He was also taught like the best way to prepare a human sacrifice. Around 7 weeks later, Henry, I guess, completed his training and was ready to, quote, go to work. So then he and Ottis set off on a road trip to the southern states to kidnap children. Yeah, they would kidnap children, and these children would either be used as like in sacrificial ceremonies within the cult, or they would be trafficked and sold on the gray market to wealthy families. According to Ottis and Henry, they said that they had kidnapped multiple kids, from babies to teenagers, and they did horrible things. I left all the horrible things they did out. It's a lot. It's real bad. Police would later like search huge areas of the Florida Everglades by boat and helicopter, looking for any kind of evidence they could find of this cult's existence, but they found nothing. They never did. Henry explained this by telling police that the cult was a nationwide conspiracy involving senior police officials and politicians, and they had the power to disappear if they wanted to. So yeah, they were hard to find, you know? Allegedly, after carrying out further tasks for this death cult, Henry was told like to just go back home and wait for further instructions. I guess though at the time, like Ottis decided to stay back, and he was like, I'll meet up with you later. So Henry left and Ottis stayed. Now, if this cult did in fact exist, and if Henry was paid handsomely for the crimes he committed, there was no evidence of like his newfound wealth, when he returned to Jacksonville. So in May of 1981, Otis's mother, Sarah, she, I guess, had died of old age. And after her death, they took in their niece, Otis's niece and nephew. So they take in the niece and nephew. The niece's name is Becky. And they decide to travel together, the four of them, to California. During this cross-country road trip, they murdered people along the way. They caused chaos. They just did all the bad things you can think of. They were doing it, okay? And a lot of the times, the niece and nephew would just be waiting in the car for them. They're like, hey, we'll be right back. And they just be waiting in the car. I don't know. We don't know if they knew what was going on. I'm assuming they didn't. I don't know, but it's fucked up. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Henry and the niece Becky, they were involved in a little love situation. A relationship is what Henry would call it, but she was 12, so I don't think anyone would call it that. Anyway, during their cross-country road trip, Otis got really sick and ended up having to be hospitalized. And then while he was hospitalized, Henry, he got arrested. He got caught for theft, and he was thrown in jail. So the niece and the nephew, they were returned to their biological mother. This whole thing was just a shit show. I don't know what their plan was with the niece and nephew. Eventually, both of the guys would return to Jacksonville, Florida, when they got out from the hospital and from jail. And by 1983, the relationship between Otis and Henry, it had begun to fall apart. No one really knows why they fell apart, but they ended up going their own ways. They split up, see you later, and they just, goodbye. Otis was left on his own, but that didn't stop him from doing some wild shit. He ended up getting arrested in June of 1983 after he burned down 2 houses in Jacksonville, Florida. And while he was in custody, Otis ended up confessing to starting around 40 different fires in the last 2 decades. He also confessed to starting a fire in a Jacksonville boarding house back in January of 1982. And in this fire, it ended up killing a 65-year-old man. His name was George Sonberg. So he tells police that he was responsible for that. And Otis ends up signing a confession stating that he and Sonberg actually were in a sexual relationship. And after the two had gotten into a big argument, Otis, he set his home on fire. And then he said after he started the fire, he walked across the street and he just watched. He watched and he masturbated twice to the fire. Yeah. It was an interesting detail I thought I'd just throw in there. I don't know. A few days after Otis's arrest, Henry was arrested for unlawful possession of a firearm in Montauk County, Texas. Now, once he was arrested, this time he started boasting about his murderous rampage that he and Otis went on. I don't know. Maybe he was just he was over it. Maybe he was just over it. At first, when word got back to Otis, he denied everything. He denied everything Henry was saying and any involvement. But once he learned that Henry was talking to the cops and taking them on guided tours of where their murder sites were at, I guess he wanted in, and he started backing up Henry's claims. By their count, Henry and Otis had murdered 108 people, including 6-year-old Adam Walsh. Does that sound familiar? It might sound familiar. Adam Walsh was the son of John Walsh. He became famous for hosting America's Most Wanted. It was in October of 1983 when Otis confessed to killing 6-year-old Adam Walsh. And according to Otis, he had snatched the child from a Sears parking lot in 1981. So Ottis said that after he decapitated the young boy with a machete, I know, Ottis drove around with the head in his car for so long that he actually forgot it was still in the car. And then once he realized it was still in the car, he then tossed the head into a canal. Adam Walsh was perhaps like one of the most well-known victims killed by Ottis or Henry. His murder would result in like new child protection laws, plus, his father getting into television and also criminal justice. But it wasn't until 25 years later, in December of 2008, and like long after Ottis had died, that the police announced Ottis as Walsh's murderer and ended up closing the case. Now, when they closed the case, like, people wanted to know, like, how they solved it, but the police, they didn't reveal, like, any new evidence or DNA evidence. The decision was reached when Ottis's niece told John Walsh that her uncle confessed to the crime on his deathbed. So there were many questions about the credibility of Henry's and Ottis's confessions. Some of the stories, like the Hand of Death cult, were just almost like people just, they were a little too incredible to believe. Both Ottis and Henry seemed to find a lot of joy in boasting about their wild crimes. So maybe they were just good storytellers. I don't know. Some believe that the police could have just used Henry and Ottis to like clear up unsolved murders that neither of them had even been involved in. And that I was like, oh, I could understand that. Just to say like, this case is closed. It was them who did it. I haven't worn lashes like this in so long. I can't see anybody now. If you want to block out all of your haters, just wear a fat lash. You won't be able to see them. There was one case specifically that I'm thinking about where they said it was Henry and Ottis who did it. But that would mean that Henry would have driven his 13-year-old Ford station wagon to cover 11,000 miles in 1 month, or around like 370 miles per day, to have committed like the crimes police attributed to him. And, apparently this would not be possible. So maybe there is some truth there when it comes to people saying like, police had just put it on them. Who knows? I don't think we'll ever really know how many victims Ottis and Henry had between the two of them. Remember in the intro, I mentioned the cannibalism? Well, and that little cult situation. Well, in November of 1983, Texas Rangers taped a phone call between Henry and Ottis. And at this time, they were in prison, so they were just catching up like old friends. And during this call, Ottis had asked Henry if he remembered the one time Ottis wanted to have ribs and if that made him a cannibal. It's like asking for advice. Does that make me a cannibal? Then he asked Henry if he remembered how he, Ottis, liked to pour the blood out of his victims. So it was just like an interesting conversation that was caught, I guess. A journalist came out to the prison to interview Ottis, and, he found it to be like quite disturbing. This interviewer asked Ottis if it was true that he ate young boys, and Ottis responded that he had eaten his quote unquote share. He then went on to say how he kidnapped kids, put them in the trunk of his car, and like drove them out to his place where no one would interrupt him. Ottis even said that he had his own BBQ sauce. Yeah, he had his own barbecue sauce recipe that he used when cooking and eating people. He provided like graphic description of sexually assaulting boys, girls, men, and women, how he like killed them, how he would remove their organs and remove their body parts. He just didn't hold back. Like some twisted gourmet chef, he went on to describe his human cooking ritual, where Ottis called the whole experience, quote, damn tasty. When asked, Ottis said that he and Henry probably killed and ate at least 150 people. I personally think him and Henry did some messed up stuff. I don't know if I can get behind 150 people, because these two were storytellers. So I think there's some truth in there, but that's just my feeling, They could be telling the truth for all I know, shit. Well, in 1984, Ottis was convicted by a Florida court for setting a fire that killed 65-year-old George Sonberg in January of 1982. He was sentenced to death for George Sonberg's murder. Ottis was indicted a month later for the 1983 murder of 19-year-old Ada Johnson. But Ottis's death sentence was changed to life in prison for two reasons. One, because he gave many unreliable confessions, and two, he had a low IQ. Yeah, he was diagnosed with like a mental impairment. So later in 1991, Ottis pled guilty to 4 more murders in Florida and received 4 more life sentences. Another crossover I didn't expect was that when Ottis was at Florida's Ryford prison, guess who was next to him, in the cell next to him? Guess. You'll never guess. Ted Bundy. Yeah, it's like all these characters are just getting together. It's wild. Ottis eventually died from liver failure on September 15th, 1996 at the prison. He was buried in a prison cemetery because nobody came to claim his body. Ottis Toole claimed to have committed hundreds of murders, but again, the exact number of his victims remains uncertain due to the lack of concrete evidence and the dubious nature of his confessions. He was convicted of 6 counts of murder, but law enforcement officials believe that he was most likely responsible for like a lot more. That number is something we probably will never know. Like, there's no doubt that the abuses Ottis was exposed to from a very young age shaped this freaking monster he became. It seemed sex and flesh became like tangled up in the pleasure centers in Ottis's brain, you know? It seemed to him a human appeared to have been like nothing more than a body of meat, alive or dead. And no one seems to know what to really believe about Ottis. But what we do know for sure is that whether or not he was born with a twisted mind or his life experience shaped him into this demon, it doesn't change the fact that this guy left a trail of blood and death everywhere he went. This guy was awful. Awful. I feel bad now because I have this little like thing I was going to put on my head because Halloween, but it's like, wow, what an awful story to put a little headpiece on with. But let me do it really quick. Hold on. I'm a bug. So my theory with Halloween is that you can just throw on a headpiece and you really could be whatever you want to be, right? Like, I'm a bug. I'm a bug. I had to add something, a little light to this dark story, huh? It was pretty brutal. You know, I left out a lot of the really gruesome. There's so many gruesome, awful details I left out because, look, no. So, yeah, but all we need to know is that these 2 guys were awful people. And how do you even end that? I don't know. But I'm a bug. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. Do you like the look? I do too. I used to wear lashes like this every single day, and I would call them my everyday lash. I really did. I was doing it. I hope you have a good day today. You make good choices, and you be safe out there, please. Please be safe out there. And let me know in the comment section down below who you want me to talk about next week. But other than that, I hope you have a good day, and I'll be seeing you guys later. Goodbye.